Welcome to No Longer Conformed. I'm Erik Garthe, and we are studying Keep Looking Up When Life Gets You Down. In this session, we'll be looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 to 10, Find Purpose in Pain. We don't like pain. We try to avoid even the slightest discomfort, and we reject the suggestion that it might be good for us. However, the lessons of life are usually taught in the classroom of suffering. Whether you're suffering through a spelling quiz, dealing with the pain of disease, or the heartbreak of grief. Look at our text, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 to 10. And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing I pleaded with the Lord 3 times, that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches, in needs and persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I'm weak, then I am strong. First, pain happens. Logically, God would reward those who do good with less pain. After all, those who do church ministry, missionaries, church planters, and pastors work for him. Wouldn't it make most sense to take special care of those who work for you? The Apostle Paul didn't get a pass from pain. He was the clear leader of God's evangelistic movement among the Gentiles, and yet he often had to endure an incredible amount of pain. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23 down to verse 29. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more, in labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and day I have been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil and sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and in nakedness. Besides the other things, what comes upon me daily? My deep concern for all the churches. Who is weak? And I'm not weak. Who is made to stumble? And I do not burn with indignation. Our text talks of a thorn of flesh. How bad was that pain? Well, let me tell you, it was straight from hell bad. It was a messenger of Satan sent to torment him. Paul asked God to remove the pain. He may have explained to God why it would be a good idea to remove the pain. He could plant more churches. He could write more letters. He could win more converts. Paul could mentor more disciples. On 3 separate occasions, Paul pulled out all the stops to ask God for a miracle. Please, God. Please, God. Please, God. No, Paul. Jesus knew pain of all kinds. Weeping at the tomb of Lazarus, over unrepentant Jerusalem. He knew the physical pain of the cross and the personal pain of betrayal. He saw rejection and disappointment just like any one of us. Someone said, pain is a part of life. It starts with a good slap to a baby's bottom and goes downhill from there. Pain happens. The question is, will you find the positives in your pain. Second, pain has a purpose. The purpose of pain is a self-study course. Amid pain that won't leave, you might be able to discover the purpose your pain has. That process leads to maturity. These are lessons that can be learned only in the classroom of suffering, and only the student can make the discovery. Paul concluded for himself that his thorn was meant to keep him from becoming conceited about his life and ministry. Consider the positives. In Philippi, Paul and Silas were beaten in public and taken away to the town dungeon. It must have become known that they had come to town speaking of a Jewish Messiah. The next day, news of the jailer's conversion would have become known. During the beating the day before, Paul and Silas must have been praying to God for relief. It didn't come, but the message of Christ exploded in that city, in a large part because of the unfair suffering they experienced. In Ephesus, Paul had what might have been his most successful ministry anywhere, preaching there for more than 2 years until all who lived in the province of Asia heard the gospel. Suddenly, 25,000 people packed the local theater and screamed their disapproval of the message that was threatening the worship of Artemis, one of the most important economic engines of the city. Though Paul never got to preach to the crowd, you can bet thousands of people heard details of the gospel that day. But Paul only knew the pain of having to leave his home and ministry in a hurry. It takes a tremendous step of faith to pray to a God who allows the suffering and say, God, I don't know the purpose of this pain, but I trust you have a purpose in it. Listen, God was very much at work in the middle of Joseph's pain. He was working in the courts of Egypt. He worked in the weather patterns around the known world. He worked in his brothers' lives, and God was working on Joseph's own heart. There are no guarantees for any of us, even those called into ministry. Pain happens. For those who will dare search for pain's purpose, there's one more thing. Third, pain has a power. Jesus told Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength or power is made perfect in weakness. Paul received revelation, but didn't hear directly from the Lord very often. He was saved about 5 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus on the road to Damascus. It was a miraculous experience, complete with the Lord's voice. A bit later, Paul had another experience in Jerusalem when he saw the Lord speaking while in a trance. Acts chapter 22 and verse 17. At least 16 years passed before Paul had another recorded experience. It was then 6 years before the next, and according to the record of Acts, there was never another one. Paul also had a vision of a man from Macedonia in Acts 16:9, and an angel of the Lord in Acts 27, verses 23 and 24. Perhaps he had other encounters, but Luke only tells us of these. It's fair to say that most of Paul's pain wasn't taken away. Peter had only 2 such experiences, according to Luke's history. Stephen also had a miraculous appearance from the Lord just before he died. Paul decided he was fine with the pain. If Christ's power was upon him for the pain, in the pain, then he'd rather experience Jesus' strength and relief. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. And that's the power of pain. Have you noticed how people listen to people in pain with a special intensity? People watch those who are hurting to see what matters most to them. If the pain is great enough, you'll find out where the strength of a person really lies. You'll see the character on the inside. And when we see passion amid such pain, we are impacted. Pain happens. Pain has a purpose, and pain has a power. The beauty of a single pearl is unmistakable. Do you know how the pearl came about? In the beginning, it's only a grain of sand. That tiny little irritant slips inside the tight seal of an oyster's shell and immediately causes discomfort. With no way to expel the grain of sand, with no way to ease the pain, the oyster coats the sand with a layer of the inner lining of its shell to make the sand smooth. This still does not ease the oyster's suffering. Again and again, the oyster coats the sand, but all the attempts to get rid of the irritant have no effect. As far as an oyster is concerned, what we call a pearl is nothing more than great suffering. But one day, the oyster is finished from the water. It's fished from the water and opened. The gem inside has amazing beauty and value, all because the oyster had great suffering. You have a great day.